we're in grizzly country, and we're traveling with all of our food at a time of year when grizzlies, they've just come out of hibernation. They're very hungry.
Mm-hmm.
And there's very little, the plants early in the summer aren't providing them really any sustenance.
You're listening to Radio Free Mike. Welcome to Radio Free Mike, the podcast about freedom and its discontent. My name is Michael Scott Moore, and today we're talking to Ben Weissenbach, a young writer from California who recently spent a lot of time adventuring through cold and isolated parts of Alaska. His first book, North to the Future, takes a look at melting glaciers and thawing permafrost to examine the effects of climate change in a place where the climate has changed the most. In Alaska, the average temperature has risen more than twice as fast as the global average since about 1970. Ben, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
So you've written a book about climate change in Alaska, and it's a really interesting book. It's a very adventurous book too, and you went up there to look at conditions in Alaska because it's something you know about. You've actually got I think you're working on a PhD in polar studies. But what drew you to Alaska in the first place?
Yeah, I started reading about Alaska when I was in high school.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in Los Angeles,
Mm-hmm.
Part of the first generation to go through adolescence with front-facing cameras and social media and all of that. And Alaska was, through the books I read, in the words of people like Jack London and John Krakauer,
Mm-hmm.
this incredibly wild place, kind of the height of the wild, and the furthest one could kind of get from, what I knew and had grown up with.
Right.
So
from suburban LA, basically.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so, I think it's a pretty natural thing. You want what you haven't had, and I wanted an adventure, and so through the writing of these authors, I started kind of dreaming up my own adventure.
Yeah, I know that impulse really well, by the way. And you went you went to Princeton and you studied under John McPhee, and he wrote an interesting book about Alaska.
He did, yeah. So McPhee went to Alaska back in the 70s, a few
Mm-hmm.
years after Alaska became a state, at a time when a lot of oil had been found in the state, but the economy was still very new. There were a lot of questions about how much of the land would be set aside and protected. The state was very young, and it was exciting, an exciting kind of stage in its development. And I read this book when I was 19, at a sort of trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, really interested in Alaska, but unsure how to get up there. My first plan was to just drive up there and head off into the bush, and
right.
We all know how that story ends.
So
I was gonna, yeah, you do, right? Exactly. I thought somehow it would end up differently for me. But so I came across this book and was wondering, kind of, is this still what Alaska's like? Is it still this place sort of beyond human history, or have these efforts to develop oil and also just some other trends in climate change and other sort of technological trends sort of brought it into mainstream American culture? So I realized that reporting could be kind of a way to get there in a more legitimate way, and a way to talk to people that might know something about this transition. So I wrote to McPhee, the fall of my sophomore year at Princeton, and
Mm-hmm.
said, I want to follow in your footsteps, literally. And I applied for a grant from my school, and both those panned out. So I had the amazing privilege of meeting with McPhee every other week, and to talk about my project and my writing, and to take his course, and plan my own project in Alaska about half a century later.
That's fantastic. Yeah, he and he was quite old at that time. Is he still teaching at Princeton? I think he's in his 90s now.
He's retired. Yeah, he was
Mm-hmm.
86
86.
when I first started reading his stuff.
Yeah.
I think he's now 94,
Yeah.
95. So he's retired, but he's continued to be involved in the project, and it's been one of the great. I he's such an extraordinary mentor and man,
Mm-hmm.
really, and so it's been a really wonderful privilege just to share the work with him, and to see his reaction to it. It's been really
Yeah.
fun.
Fantastic. I mean, just a class with McPhee would be terrific, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so you met you met a number of people once you went to Alaska, and one of them was interested in the tree line up there. So tell me about because that was your first excursion, or the first excursion that you write about in the book.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, in my first summer in Alaska, I was just sort of bouncing around, asking people, if you could talk to anyone in the state, who would you want to talk to? Um, and a lot of the people whose names came up were people who were studying change in the environment, and were scientists, because Alaska has warmed by something like 5 degrees Fahrenheit. At least Arctic Alaska has warmed by about 5 degrees Fahrenheit since McPhee visited.
Mm-hmm.
And there's very little infrastructure up there. I mean, that you can walk for months at a time and not see anyone,
Right.
or any roads or anything. And so
Only four
um,
highways you mentioned.
yes, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the scientists who kind of had both the outdoor skills and the sort of scientific toolkit to study what was happening up there is this guy named Roman Dial, who's really sort of a legend in the outdoors community. He's made first ascents of a lot of mountains in Alaska. He's pioneered the sport of pack rafting, where pack rafts are these little inflatable boats that pack down to about the size of paper towel roll, but you can blow
Wow.
them up, and you can, they're pretty hardy, and you can take them down rapids. And so Roman was leveraging these outdoor skills to study how the boreal forest, which is the world's largest terrestrial biome,
Mm-hmm.
and stores just a huge amount of carbon, both above ground and in terms of wood, but also below ground in terms of cold soil that it insulates.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the big questions facing the climate science community is, how are these forests going to respond to all this warming? Are they going to migrate northwards and grow denser and more thickly, and absorb a lot more carbon in trees, or are they going to dry out and burn? And so there's a real range of possibilities between there. And we
Mm-hmm.
were walking along the northern tree line, the line beyond which no trees grow, the line
Mm-hmm.
between forest and tundra, to see what's happening up there. Are the trees migrating northwards, or are they staying put? We're just traveling along by foot and in these little inflatable boats for weeks and weeks at a time.
And just quickly, what are the implications of the two possibilities? So if the trees are spreading north, which is what I would kind of expect in a warming world, or part of the world where it's warming faster than most other regions, I would almost expect more greenery to start spreading north. But what is the implication either way?
Yeah, it turns out to be really complicated, and because there are a number of countervailing dynamics. So on one hand, trees and plants performing photosynthesis is good where humans are concerned, just in
Mm-hmm.
general, because they're drawing carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and turning it into wood.
Yeah.
which again takes planet warming greenhouse gases out of
The
the
atmosphere.
atmosphere.
Hmm.
Um, and yet, on the other hand, trees are generally much darker than the surrounding tundra, and certainly much darker than the snow that they cover. And dark surfaces absorb more solar energy.
Hmm.
So, for example, like a dark shirt on a hot summer day, it makes you a lot hotter than a
Makes you
white
hotter.
shirt.
Yeah. Hmm.
In general, like in tropical regions, of course, having trees there more than offsets that sort of warming effect caused by, forest canopies are generally darker than surrounding territory. But that's also because trees grow very densely at lower latitudes. But up at the poles, they don't grow that large. The trees are pretty small, but their canopies can still have a very strong warming effect. So
Hmm.
those are just two, examples. In reality, there are a number of other dynamics too, in terms of how the trees insulate the soil, which
Hmm.
holds lots of carbon, how they affect the hydrology, the exchange of kind of water from the atmosphere to the landscape. And it's really hard actually to net out the climate impacts
Right.
and that's to say nothing of the ecological impacts, for all the other plants and animals that live up there. How are they going to adapt to this vegetational migration?
Right.
Really hard
Uh,
to say.
and that's one thing that's interesting about your book is that you go into what the possibilities are in either direction, and it's not simple. It's in fact really interesting. And so tell us about the journey. You and Roman and a number of other people, at least three other people, just started walking.
Yeah. So the kind of the study design was, we would just we actually made a couple different expeditions. So the first expedition I joined Roman on
Hmm.
was a National Science Foundation expedition. Um, Walking from the one highway that crosses through northern Alaska, just kind of right through the center of it, out to the Canadian border.
Hmm.
We'd be walking through this mountain range called the Brooks Range, which is entirely above the Arctic Circle. Um, and we'd be kind of crossing rivers and floating rivers in pack rafts, and walking the rest of the time, and just gathering data as we went. We'd be taking opportunistic observation, just seeing where the tree line is growing now relative to in the past, but also kind of getting down on our hands and knees and seeing if there are young trees popping up, and
Hmm.
taking measurements of soil temperatures, installing data loggers, coring trees to see how their growth patterns have been changing in recent decades. All this stuff. Um, and so yeah, so that science piece is part of the story, but it's also a real, it was a real adventure,
Adventure, yeah.
because again, for those 6 weeks, it was me and Roman and I were sharing a tent, the two of us. um, and then several of his other students, three of his other students. That was Russell Wong. It was at the time they were all about my age, all undergraduates. Russell Wong, Julia Ditto,
Hmm.
and Duncan Wright. Um, they were sharing another tent, and we're in grizzly country, and we're
Right.
traveling with all of our food at a time of year when grizzlies are really they've just come out of hibernation. They're very hungry,
Hmm.
and there's very little. The plants early in the summer aren't providing them really any sustenance. And because we're north of the tree line, we can't store our food in the trees.
Yeah, no
And
trees.
because we're traveling, so we have so much distance to cover, we can't carry barrels to store
Hmm.
our food in. So we're sleeping with all of our food, just the food between us and the shotgun behind our heads.
Right.
Um,
You and Roman got to sleep with the food.
yes, yeah, we had that privilege. And so and yeah, so on once on that trip, and in a more serious way on our next trip, we had bears grizzly bears follow us.
You had grizzly encounters.
And
So
stalk
before
us.
we
Yeah.
before we talk about this, I want to remind everyone of the line in A Walk in the Woods by Bill Bryson. I don't know if you've read it, but he goes on for pages about the possibility of bears on the Appalachian Trail. And he talks about which bears will climb a tree to get you. And he says most of the time it's black bears. Most of the time a grizzly will not climb a tree to get you. Here's the thing. Sometimes they will.
Exactly.
And you did not even have that advantage. So you didn't even have a tree to climb. I'm sorry to interrupt, but this has been a free preview of this episode. And the whole thing is open to paid subscribers to Radio Free Mike. So if you'd like to hear the rest, please hit the link in your show notes or in the body of the email we've sent you and upgrade your subscription over at Substack. Then you'll be able to listen to the full episode on any platform. Thanks for listening.